My husband left me for my own sister. For years later, he saw the child behind me, and his face turned white. Stick with me while I share my story, because it's one that still feels unreal even as I put it into words. My name is Emily Carter. I was 28 when the world I had built around me came crashing down. To everyone else, my marriage to Daniel Carter looked perfect. Daniel was the kind of man who knew how to charm a room. Confident smile, easy words, and just enough charisma to make people overlook his selfish streak. To me, he was my husband, the man I believed I'd grow old with. And then there was my younger sister, Olivia Hayes. Olivia was everything I wasn't, reckless, impulsive, the kind of person who thrived on attention. Growing up, I often brushed off her jealousy. She always wanted what I had, my clothes, my friends, my achievements. But I never imagined she'd go after the one thing I thought was untouchable, my marriage. The first signs were subtle. Daniel's late nights at work, the way he started hiding his phone, the sudden coldness in his voice when he spoke to me. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, every marriage has rough patches. But then whispers began, friends pulling me aside, hinting that they had seen Daniel with someone. When I finally pushed for the truth, I discovered the cruelest betrayal I could have imagined. My husband was having an affair with Olivia. I remember the moment like it was branded into my memory. I confronted Daniel in our living room, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own voice. He didn't deny it. In fact, he barely looked ashamed. "Emily," he said, his tone flat, "Olivia understands me in ways you never did." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Within weeks, Daniel filed for divorce. It all moved so quickly. I barely had time to breathe before the papers were shoved in front of me. And before I could even process the end of my marriage, I learned he had married Olivia, my own sister. The humiliation was unbearable. Family dinners turned into battlegrounds, relatives whispering behind my back, some even choosing sides. My mother begged me to keep peace, to forgive and forget. But how do you forgive your own blood for stealing the life you built? I felt abandoned, betrayed not just by my husband, but by the sister I had once defended, once loved. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake replaying every moment, every red flag I ignored, every time I believed Daniel's excuses. I wondered if I had been foolish all along, if my love had blinded me to who he truly was. But the truth was, I wasn't just losing a husband. I was losing a sister, a family, a sense of safety I could never get back. I didn't know it then, but that betrayal, the deepest cut of my life, wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The days after the divorce felt like walking through fog. Everywhere I turned, there were whispers, neighbors lowering their voices when I passed by, friends who used to invite me to dinners suddenly keeping their distance. Some said I should have seen it coming. Others quietly admitted they admired Olivia's boldness, as if stealing my husband was some kind of twisted triumph. The sting of betrayal was sharp enough, but the gossip made me feel like the world was laughing at me. I would sit alone in my small apartment, staring at the walls, wondering how I had gone from a wife with a home to a woman abandoned by both her husband and her sister. Nights were the worst. I'd curl up in bed, replaying the moment Daniel looked at me with those cold, dismissive eyes. The man I once trusted with my whole heart had walked away without hesitation, and my own blood had taken his hand to start a new life. At first, I thought I would drown in the humiliation. But slowly, a fire began to grow inside me. If no one else would stand by me, then I would learn to stand by myself. I threw myself into work, picking up extra hours at the accounting firm where I had always been the quiet one in the back office. The routine became my anchor, and every paycheck was a reminder that I could survive without Daniel. I didn't need his charm, his promises, or his betrayal. And then, just weeks after the ink on the divorce papers had dried, life threw me a curve I never expected. I was sitting in a clinic, staring at the little test strip in disbelief. Pregnant. The word echoed in my head over and over. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I thought of Daniel, of Olivia. If they found out, my child would become another pawn in their twisted relationship, another thing for them to use against me. But then, something inside me shifted. For the first time since the betrayal, I didn't feel broken. I felt a strange, steady strength. This wasn't a burden. This was a reason to fight, to push forward, to reclaim the life that had been ripped away from me. I decided right then, Daniel and Olivia would never know. This child was mine and mine alone. The weeks that followed were hard. Morning sickness, exhaustion, the constant fear of what people would say if they discovered the truth. But each time I felt that tiny flutter inside me, I found the will to keep going. I started imagining a future, one where laughter filled my apartment, where I wasn't alone anymore. I realized I didn't need revenge, at least not in the way people expected. My revenge would be survival. My revenge would be joy. My revenge would be raising a child who was loved, safe, and far away from the poison of betrayal. And so, with every passing day, I stitched my broken pieces back together, stronger, sharper, and ready for what was to come. The day Ethan Carter came into the world was the day my life changed forever. After hours of pain and exhaustion, the nurse placed him in my arms, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. His tiny fingers curled around mine, his cries softened against my chest, and in that moment I knew, this little boy was my reason for living. Everything I had lost, every piece of my broken heart, suddenly felt like it had a purpose. Ethan was my beginning, not my ending. Motherhood was not easy. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the fear that I wasn't enough, it all weighed on me. But every morning when I looked into Ethan's big brown eyes, I found strength I never knew I had. I learned how to live on less sleep, how to stretch every dollar, how to smile even when I was exhausted. My world revolved around this tiny human, and I promised him silently, night after night, that I would never let him feel the abandonment I had felt. Balancing work and motherhood was a battle. I returned to my small accounting job just months after giving birth, carrying guilt with me as I dropped Ethan off at daycare. Some colleagues looked at me with pity, others with judgment. Single mothers always struggle, one whispered in the break room, thinking I couldn't hear. But instead of letting their words crush me, I let them fuel me. I worked harder, stayed later, and made sure that Ethan had everything he needed, even if it meant I went without. Money was tight, and there were nights when I skipped dinner so Ethan's bottle could be full. I patched up secondhand clothes, took on extra bookkeeping jobs from home, and made sacrifices no one saw. But none of it mattered when Ethan's laugh filled the room. His giggles became the soundtrack of my evenings, his first steps the proudest moment of my life, his little arms reaching for me the sweetest comfort I could ever imagine. Yes, people judged. Some neighbors whispered that I had been careless. Others hinted that I should have gone back to Daniel, as if I could crawl back to the man who shattered me. But I ignored them. My son was proof that I didn't need Daniel or Olivia. Ethan was mine, and he was the brightest light in the darkness I had endured. As Ethan grew into a toddler, his personality bloomed. He had Daniel's sharp jawline, but he carried my stubborn spirit. He filled our tiny apartment with joy, running through the rooms with toy cars, his little voice shouting "Mommy." Every time he wanted to show me something new. Every milestone reminded me that I had survived. I had rebuilt. And though the scars of betrayal still lingered, Ethan's smile made them bearable. He wasn't just my child, he was my redemption, my proof that even after devastation, love could still bloom. While I was quietly building a life with my son, Daniel and Olivia's perfect little marriage was already beginning to crumble. At first, they had paraded themselves around like a fairy tale couple, smiling for pictures at family gatherings, holding hands as if to prove a point. But behind closed doors, the cracks were showing, and soon they were impossible to hide. Olivia had always been reckless, and marriage didn't change her. She loved to spend money, clothes, handbags, dinners at restaurants they couldn't afford. Daniel had once thought her spontaneity was exciting, but it didn't take long before he realized that living with her was nothing like chasing her in secret. Bills piled up, arguments broke out, and the man who once told me Olivia understood him began to see her for who she really was. He grew bitter, snapping at her for every careless purchase, every overdraft notice, every package that arrived at their doorstep. And Olivia, never one to take responsibility, snapped right back. She mocked him for being boring, for not making enough money, for expecting her to live like some housewife. Their fights became the talk of the family. At holidays, the tension was unbearable. Daniel sulking in the corner with a drink while Olivia laughed too loudly, her eyes scanning the room for attention. It didn't take long before the rumors began. People whispered that Olivia had been seen with other men, flirting at bars, staying out late, giggling on the phone with someone who definitely wasn't her husband. At first, Daniel ignored it. Maybe he didn't want to admit he had built his new life on quicksand. But as the whispers grew louder, as friends dropped hints and cousins shared uneasy glances, even he couldn't pretend anymore. The family dinners that used to be a showcase of their happiness turned cold. Olivia would roll her eyes when Daniel spoke. Daniel would grit his teeth whenever she reached for her phone. Relatives stopped asking how they were doing, too afraid of the explosion that might follow. The same people who once judged me, who once smiled at Olivia as if she had won some prize, now began to look at them differently. They saw the bitterness in Daniel's face, the sharpness in Olivia's voice, the emptiness behind their smiles. Their marriage, built on betrayal, was rotting from within, and everyone could see it. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet, watching from afar. I didn't need to gloat, didn't need to remind anyone that I had once warned of Olivia's selfishness or Daniel's weakness. Their downfall was happening all on its own, without me lifting a finger. Daniel had chosen Olivia over me, believing she was his better match. But now, as their fights echoed through family gatherings and rumors of her unfaithfulness spread like wildfire, it was clear. The life he traded me for was nothing but a hollow shell, cracking piece by piece. And soon it would all come crashing down. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon when everything changed. I had taken Ethan to the grocery store, his little hand tucked into mine as we walked through the aisles. He was 4 now, full of energy and endless questions, pointing at cereal boxes and asking if we could buy the ones with cartoon characters on them. I laughed, pushing the cart slowly, savoring the simple joy of these moments. To me, it was just another errand. But fate had a different plan. As I reached for a carton of milk, I heard a familiar voice behind me. The sound froze me in place before I even turned. Slowly, I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, Daniel. My ex-husband, the man who had broken me, the man who had chosen my sister over me. He looked older, the charm dulled from his face, his jaw tighter, his eyes heavier. For a second, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. And then his gaze fell to Ethan. My son stood there, clutching my hand, his wide eyes staring curiously at the stranger who had stopped in his tracks. Daniel's face went white. It was as if he were staring into a mirror from years ago, because Ethan's resemblance to him was undeniable. The same sharp jawline, the same deep brown eyes, even the same little furrow in the brow when he was concentrating. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came out at first. He looked back and forth between me and Ethan, his breathing uneven, his world unraveling in front of him. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and trembling with shock. "Emily, who is he?" I straightened, my hand tightening around Ethan's. My heart pounded, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "This is my son," I said simply, leaving no room for further explanation. Daniel's eyes widened, anger and disbelief flickering across his face. "Don't play games with me. He's mine, isn't he?" His words came out harsh, almost desperate. People were starting to glance our way, curious about the tension crackling in the air. I didn't want Ethan to see me unravel, so I pulled the cart forward, trying to end the encounter right there. But Daniel wasn't about to let me slip away. He followed me toward the checkout, his footsteps heavy, his voice sharp with demand. "You hid him from me?" he hissed, keeping his voice just low enough not to draw too much attention. "All these years, Emily? You let me live a lie." I turned to face him, my spine straight, my eyes locked onto his. "You made your choice 4 years ago. You walked away from me, from us. You don't get to demand anything now." For a moment, Daniel looked shattered, caught between rage and regret. His perfect little world, already cracking, had just been split wide open. And standing there in that grocery store, with Ethan's small hand gripping mine, I realized Daniel's reckoning had only just begun. The moment we stepped out of the grocery store, Daniel blocked my path. My heart raced, but I refused to let fear show. Ethan clung to my hand, sensing the tension but too young to understand its depth. Daniel's face was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and disbelief. He looked at me like he wanted answers, but I had no intention of giving him the satisfaction of seeing me falter. "Emily," he said, his voice low but sharp, "tell me. Is he mine? Is this my son?" His hand gestured toward Ethan, who was watching him with innocent curiosity. I drew a steadying breath and knelt slightly so Ethan wouldn't be intimidated. "Yes, Daniel. He is your son. But that doesn't mean anything to you now." I stood back up, letting my gaze meet his without flinching. His expression shifted, anger boiling into desperation. "You can't just keep me from him. I have rights. I deserve to be part of his life." I shook my head slowly, a bitter smile touching my lips. "Rights? You gave up your rights the moment you walked out on me. You chose Olivia. You chose betrayal. You don't get to waltz back into our lives and pretend you suddenly care." Daniel's eyes flickered, a mix of guilt and frustration passing over his face. He opened his mouth to argue, to claim some moral high ground, but I didn't let him speak. "Do you even remember the nights I cried alone?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly, though I kept it firm. "The nights I wondered why the man I loved could betray me with the person I trusted most? I forgave my pain to survive, to raise this child. And you," I paused, letting the words sink in, "you didn't just betray me. You destroyed the family we built. You left me broken, and yet you think you can just step in now." Daniel's hands clenched into fists, the tension in his shoulders visible. "I didn't know," he started, but I cut him off. "You didn't know? Don't insult my intelligence," I said sharply. "You made choices, Daniel. You chose Olivia over your wife, over your son. Ethan doesn't need a father who abandons him the moment life gets complicated. He needs someone who shows up, who cares, who loves him unconditionally. That person is me." For a long moment, Daniel just stared at us, his face a mask of regret, anger, and helplessness. Ethan tugged gently at my hand, his innocent voice breaking the tension. "Mommy, can we go home?" I smiled down at him, my heart full, and looked back at Daniel. "Go home, Daniel. And remember this, your chance to be part of his life passed the day you walked away. Now, you're just a stranger trying to step into a life you chose not to live." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he knew there was nothing more to say. I turned, holding Ethan close, and walked away. For the first time, I felt the weight of the past lift slightly. I had stood my ground. I had protected my son. And I had shown Daniel that betrayal might shake me, but it would never break me. Daniel slammed the front door behind him, storming into the house with a force that made the walls shake. Olivia looked up from the couch, her wine glass halfway to her lips, and froze. "Daniel, what?" she began, but he cut her off before she could finish. "Don't play dumb," he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. "Why didn't you tell me about him? About the child?" Olivia's eyes widened, confusion flashing across her face. "Child? What are you talking about?" Daniel's face went pale. "Ethan. Emily's son. The boy I just saw at the grocery store. He's mine, isn't he?" Olivia blinked, taken aback. "What? No. I didn't know. I swear, Daniel, I didn't know she had a child." Her words only fueled Daniel's fury. Not know. How could you? How could we have been married all these years, and you never told me about this? I have a son, Olivia. A son I never even knew existed because of you." Olivia stumbled backward, panic creeping into her voice. "Wait, Daniel, calm down. I didn't know she was keeping a child from you. She cut me off completely years ago. I didn't have any idea what she was doing. I promise." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing the living room like a storm contained in human form. "You didn't have to know. You didn't have to do anything. But you were supposed to be honest with me. You were supposed to." His words cracked, the anger giving way to confusion and hurt. Olivia sank back into the couch, gripping the wine glass as if it could anchor her to some sense of stability. "Daniel, I'm telling you the truth. I didn't know. I wouldn't have hidden it from you. I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel's eyes burned into hers. "Do you realize what this means, Olivia? That child has my blood in him. That child could have been in my life all these years. And you, did nothing because you didn't even know? Unbelievable." Olivia's confident, careless demeanor from before had vanished. She was trembling now, her bravado replaced with fear and insecurity. "Daniel, please calm down. We can figure this out." But Daniel was already seeing the cracks in their marriage more clearly than ever. Olivia's ignorance, whether genuine or not, highlighted how fragile their relationship had always been. He had married her thinking she was the perfect match, the woman he believed understood him better than anyone else. And yet here was proof that everything was built on a lie, a foundation of selfishness and negligence. Olivia's voice faltered. "Daniel, save it," he said, his tone icy. "I need time to think. I need to understand how I ended up here, married to someone who can't even face reality. This changes everything." As Daniel stormed out of the room, Olivia was left alone, shaking, staring at the empty doorway. The life she had thought was secure, the marriage, the control, the status, was crumbling beneath her. For the first time, she realized she wasn't untouchable, that her reckless choices and ignorance could no longer shield her. Their already fragile marriage, built on illusions and betrayal, was now teetering on the edge of collapse, and Olivia finally understood. She was no longer in control. The truth had arrived, and it was merciless. Weeks passed after the grocery store encounter, and Daniel didn't stop. He called once, twice, then repeatedly, leaving messages on my phone that I never answered. Each time, my chest tightened, but I refused to engage. He had no right to intrude into the life he abandoned. It escalated when he began showing up unannounced. One afternoon, I was walking out of the accounting office, Ethan in tow, when I saw him leaning against my car, a nervous smile on his face. "Emily," he called softly, as if we were old friends meeting after a long vacation. "Can we talk? Please." I stopped in my tracks, Ethan tugging at my hand. "Daniel," I said cautiously, "this isn't the time. You can't just appear whenever you feel like it." He straightened, taking a hesitant step closer. "I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But I want to be part of Ethan's life. I want a chance to make things right." I looked down at Ethan, who was innocently glancing up at us, and my resolve hardened. "No, Daniel. You don't get to make things right by showing up now. You walked away. You chose Olivia over me, over him. Ethan will not be dragged into your toxic world." Daniel's face fell. Guilt flickered in his eyes, quickly replaced by frustration. "Emily, I'm his father. I have a responsibility. Don't shut me out entirely. Please. I've changed." You've changed," I echoed, my voice steady but icy. "You walked out for someone else. You left your own child behind. That isn't change, that's cowardice." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a step back, clearly struggling with the mix of guilt and anger boiling inside him. I saw him wrestle with the reality that his charm and apologies couldn't undo the years he had lost, the moments he had missed, or the life I had painstakingly built without him. Days turned into weeks, and his attempts didn't stop. Emails, texts, showing up at the park where Ethan played. But each time I remained firm. Ethan's safety and happiness were my priority, and I wouldn't let Daniel's presence threaten that. Each failed attempt to manipulate the situation, to guilt me, only strengthened my resolve. As I watched him, I realized something profound. I didn't need Daniel. I had Ethan, a thriving, joyful child, a home I had made safe and full of love, a life built on my resilience. The anger and disappointment I had carried for years were transforming into strength and clarity. One afternoon, after another failed visit attempt, I found myself smiling at Ethan as he chased bubbles across the park. Daniel watched from a distance, unsure and lost, and for the first time, I felt a calm satisfaction. He didn't need to be part of our life. I had already won. In trying to force his way back, Daniel only reminded me that my world no longer depended on him. I had rebuilt it without him. And in that realization, I discovered a power far greater than any apology or regret he could ever offer. I was whole, independent, and unshakable, and Ethan's laughter was the proof. Olivia's downfall began quietly, but the signs were impossible to ignore. After Daniel discovered Ethan, she felt the first real tremors of insecurity shake her carefully constructed life. She lashed out, trying to regain control, pointing fingers at me as if I had orchestrated the entire situation. "This is all your fault, Emily," she screamed at a family gathering, her face red and twisted with anger. "You ruined my marriage. You always had to interfere, always had to prove you're better than me." Family members exchanged uneasy glances. Some remembered the way Olivia had treated me in the past, the cruel jokes, the petty betrayals. Her outburst didn't elicit sympathy. Instead, it revealed the cracks that had been there all along. People whispered quietly among themselves, shaking their heads at her bitterness and desperation. Olivia tried to spin me as manipulative, as a schemer who had plotted to destroy their happiness, but her words sounded hollow, desperate, and unconvincing. Daniel, who had spent years blinded by charm and infatuation, finally saw her clearly. He noticed how her anger was rooted in jealousy and self-preservation rather than love. He remembered the nights of carelessness, the arguments, the money spent on frivolous things, the flirtations that he had tried to ignore. All the illusions of perfection shattered in that moment. He realized he had married not a partner, but a person who had no regard for him or their marriage beyond how it served her ego. Their fights escalated, more public and more vicious. Olivia's temper flared at the smallest provocation, and Daniel no longer had the patience to tolerate it. He began to file documents, speak to lawyers, and make arrangements that had once seemed impossible to contemplate. Their marriage, built on betrayal and ignorance, finally collapsed. Daniel officially filed for divorce, severing the last tie to a woman whose manipulations had once seemed harmless, but were now laid bare for all to see. Olivia, left to herself, found the life she had thought so secure slipping away. Friends who had once flattered her and envied her boldness now kept their distance, wary of her volatility. Family members who had humored her whims quietly aligned with Daniel's choices, refusing to be dragged into her endless drama. Alone, she paced through her empty house, bitterness mounting with every passing day. The lavish lifestyle she had clung to could no longer shield her from the emptiness that gnawed at her soul. She had always feared being powerless, being exposed, being alone. And now, ironically, that fear had become her reality. Every glance at the empty rooms, every unanswered phone call, reminded her that the life she had tried to control and manipulate had slipped entirely from her grasp. Olivia, who once seemed untouchable, was now isolated, her anger and envy her only companions. Meanwhile, I watched from afar, Ethan in my arms, my life full of warmth, laughter, and love. I had never needed to lift a finger. Her downfall was the natural consequence of her choices, her selfishness, and her recklessness. The woman who once thought she could take everything from me had nothing left. And in that quiet, bitter solitude, Olivia finally faced the truth. She had lost everything, exactly as she feared. Years of pain, betrayal, and heartbreak had taught me one thing. Revenge doesn't always come from action. Sometimes the quiet life you build, the strength you cultivate, and the love you pour into the right places are the most devastating forms of justice. Daniel and Olivia's lives fell apart under their own choices, their own selfishness, and I never had to interfere. Watching it unfold, I felt no gloating satisfaction, only a calm recognition that I had survived, and more importantly, thrived. Daniel eventually came to terms with his failures, though it was a slow and bitter process. He showed up at my door months after Olivia's final exit from his life, a man humbled and desperate. "Emily," he said, voice strained, eyes red. "I know I have no right to ask, but I need to see him. Ethan. I want to be part of his life." I studied him carefully, the weight of those 4 years evident in his posture, his tone, and the quiet guilt that clung to him like a shadow. I didn't rush into forgiveness. I didn't invite him back into our lives without boundaries. "You walked away," I said firmly. "You lost the right to be involved in his life the moment you left. If you want to see him, it will be on my terms. Supervised visits. Limited time. Nothing more." Daniel nodded, swallowing his pride, and accepted my conditions. I knew this was his reality check, a reminder of the choices he had made and the consequences he had to live with. Meanwhile, Ethan remained my anchor, my joy, and my reason for staying strong. The little boy who once clutched my hand in the grocery store had grown into a lively, confident child, unaware of the storm his father's absence had created. Life settled into a rhythm that I had longed for: peace, stability, and laughter. I watched Ethan's face light up as he played with friends at the park, his tiny legs running faster than I could keep up with, his giggles echoing in the crisp afternoon air. Daniel observed from a distance during supervised visits, hesitant, careful, and aware that his presence alone could not erase the years he had lost. I realized then that my true revenge had never needed to be vengeful or cruel. It wasn't about proving him wrong, punishing Olivia, or flaunting my happiness. My revenge was simpler and infinitely more powerful. It was building a life he could not touch, a life full of love, joy, and resilience. I had created a world where his mistakes and betrayals could no longer harm me or my son. As I sat on the park bench, watching Ethan run across the grass, sunlight catching the curls of his hair, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The past no longer held power over me. Daniel's pleas, Olivia's bitterness, the whispers of gossip, they were shadows fading into nothing. What remained was a life I had fought for, a son I adored, and the quiet knowledge that I had won. Not through confrontation, but through strength, patience, and unwavering love. Ethan's laughter rang out across the park, pure and untethered, and I smiled, knowing that in the end, the best revenge of all was simply this: living well, loving fully, and letting life itself deliver justice. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's shoes? Walk away from a family that betrayed you, or fight to stay and fix things? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and share your opinion. And if you love these kinds of emotional, real-life stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.